In an age when the world still dreamed, and names were carved into fate like runes into stone, there lived a man who awoke each night inside a stranger's life. He was a humble scribe by day, but when he closed his eyes, he became someone else, a blacksmith in a city that no map dared claim, forging blades in a forge that never cooled, in a body that was not his own. At first, it was only a dream. Then it became his prison, the truth. But the deeper he wandered through that ancient city, past the red-hooded monks, the whispering trees, the sword that knew his name, the more he began to wonder, what if he was never the dreamer at all? What if he was the dream being dreamt? Step carefully now, traveler. You're about to enter a tale of stolen faces, shattered time, and a choice that could rewrite the soul itself. This is the story of the man who dreamt of a stranger's life, until he woke up there. In the northern reach of the old kingdom of Ilaran, where the snow kissed the rooftops of stone villages and the rivers whispered old prayers into the roots of trees, there lived a scribe named Kalen. He was no noble, no warrior, no man of fame, just a quiet soul with ink-stained hands, whose days passed beneath the steady drip of candle wax and the rustle of parchment. He lived alone in a moss-wrapped cottage at the edge of Eldbrook, a town so small even the taxmen forgot it half the year. Kalen wrote records, ledgers, scrolls, histories, nothing more. But it was said he remembered everything he ever read. 1,000 dates, 100 births, every line of poetry he copied. The villagers often joked that if you lost your grandfather's will or couldn't remember your father's debts, Kalen could summon them from his mind like pulling thread from a spindle. But none of that is why his story is told. It began, as many strange stories do, with a dream. The first one came quietly, with the hush of winter winds beyond his shutters. Kalen had fallen asleep at his desk, the quill still in his fingers. He remembered dreaming of sparks, not stars, not fireflies, but sparks, leaping from an anvil's edge. He dreamt of heat, of hammers striking glowing iron, of a forge alive with fire and breath. A blacksmith worked there, broad-shouldered, face half hidden beneath soot and sweat. His hands moved with practiced rhythm, shaping the world with every blow. But this man wasn't a stranger for long. Kalen knew things he shouldn't. He knew the smith's name was Rin, that he lived above the forge, alone, with only the sound of wolves and the hiss of steel for company. He knew Rin liked his eggs runny and his tea burnt. He knew the floor creaked on the 7th plank. He could smell the horses that lived behind the forge, feel the itch of the leather apron across Rin's chest. When he awoke, the dream clung to him like fog on a moor. He tried to shake it off, blaming the cold or too many hours squinting at ink. But then he looked at his fingers, blackened, as if he had touched coal. The next night, the dream returned, not in fragments, but whole, as if the world he slept in was no longer his own. This time, he saw Rin greet a merchant with a broken blade. They haggled over silver and weight. Kalen felt the burn of the forge's heat, the weight of the hammer, the strain in Rin's back. He watched a boy, no older than 10, sneak bread from the window. Rin let him go with a nod. And then, the mirror. It hung behind the forge door, fogged and old. Rin looked into it as he wiped his brow, and Kalen's breath caught. It was his own face staring back. Not similar. Not slightly so. Kalen's eyes, his jaw, his thin scar along the brow from when he'd fallen off a fence at 12. He woke with a cry, tumbling from his bed, cold sweat on his skin. On his palms, red, burnt, as if he'd pressed them against heated iron. For 3 nights the dream repeated, not as a memory, but a continuation, as though time had split into 2 rivers and Kalen's soul had leapt between them. Rin's life unfolded with increasing clarity. A city named Emberlight, massive and ancient, with towers built of basalt and glass that caught the sunrise like a cage of fire. It was no city Kalen had ever read of. Its tongue was strange, yet he understood it. Its customs foreign, yet familiar. Rin's life was simple, a blacksmith serving a city that never slept. But shadows lingered, a whisper in the alleyways, a name scratched beneath the anvil, a figure in red robes watching from rooftops. Kalen began keeping notes by daylight, scribbled in margins and the backs of scrolls. Emberlight has no stars. Merchant's name Elver. Scar on left cheek. Child with birthmark, seen twice now. Watches the forge. The details built like bricks around his sanity. And every morning, the soot returned. Every morning, his hands bore the marks of a labor he had never performed. He stopped going to the village. People noticed. The baker's daughter left bread at his door. The steward sent someone to check if he'd taken ill. But Kalen had stopped caring. The dream wasn't just a dream anymore. It was a life, and it was devouring him. By the 6th night, he stayed awake as long as he could, biting his tongue, walking the floor, throwing icy water on his face. He dared not sleep. Yet when he finally succumbed, it was not to rest, but to return. He entered the dream differently this time. Not from the forge, but from the sky. He fell through clouds that hissed like scrolls burning, through winds that whispered his name in 1,000 voices. And when he landed, Rin was gone. The forge cold. The tools rusted. The streets of Emberlight abandoned. He wandered, shouting, calling. But the city no longer recognized him. Statues bore different faces. The doors no longer opened. And from the darkness beyond the forge, a single voice called out, "You are not him." He awoke gasping, choking on smoke. Not dream smoke, but his cottage was untouched, but the air reeked of cinders. His blankets were scorched. His writing desk had a single handprint burned into the wood. His own. That morning, he took an oath. He would find Emberlight. In this world or the next. Dream or not, he needed answers. But that night, the 7th night, the story changed again. He lay in bed, trembling, praying to gods he barely believed in. He told himself he would control the dream this time. He would not let it control him. He closed his eyes and opened them not in the forge, not in Emberlight, but in a dark chamber of stone, lit by candles that floated in the air like fireflies caught in honey. A figure waited before him. Not Rin, not a villager. A woman, hooded, skin like smoke, eyes like ink spilled in water. "You've crossed," she said. Kalen tried to speak, but no sound came. "You should not be here yet." She raised her hand. The candles flickered. "You chose this path when you stared too long into another man's soul. The thread is cut. You may not wake again until the fire has burned your name clean." He screamed, and woke, except he didn't. His body remained still. He could feel it, feel the bed beneath him, the cold, but he could not move, could not blink. The room around him faded, and then the forge roared to life once more. But this time, Rin was gone. The anvil stood empty, and Kalen's hands held the hammer. When Kalen next opened his eyes, they were not his. He awoke to the iron tang of soot and sweat, to heat pressing against his skin like a second sun. Overhead, a stone ceiling arched like the shell of a giant beast. Beneath him, earth trembled softly, not from an earthquake, but from fire, always fire, crackling and pulsing like a living heart. The forge was not a dream. It was real now. He could feel the leather apron against his chest, thick and worn. His hands, calloused and rough, moved with an instinct he had never earned. He flexed them slowly, watching the way soot fell from his fingers like dust from old parchment. Nearby, an anvil waited, scarred from countless blows. Tools hung from beams. A hearth glowed in one corner, and beyond the wide stone doorway, the world shimmered with amber light. He stepped out into Emberlight. It was like no city Kalen had ever read about in his many ledgers, scrolls, or tales. The sky was a permanent dusk, veiled with strange clouds that glowed from within, not with sunlight, but with something older, something alive. The buildings rose high and heavy, carved from black basalt streaked with veins of molten orange, as if the stone itself remembered fire. Braziers floated midair, tethered by iron chains to towers and arches, each burning with a pale, golden flame that gave no smoke. But what struck Kalen most was the silence. A city so large should have roared with the sound of footsteps, carts, arguments, laughter, steel, bells. Instead, Emberlight whispered. Even the crowds that walked its streets moved like shadows, speaking in murmurs, glancing over their shoulders as if expecting someone or something to listen too closely. Above them all, crimson-robed monks stood like sentinels. They watched from terraces and rooftops, their hoods drawn, faces hidden. They did not speak. They only stared. And every time Kalen caught their gaze, his breath shortened, as though a weight had been laid across his chest. A woman passed him on the street. She was young, carrying a basket of copper rings. He nodded politely, but she frowned. "Look tired, Master Rin." Kalen stiffened. Rin, the name of the blacksmith whose life he had dreamt, whose body he now wore. "I'm fine," he said, startled by the roughness of his own voice. "You were gone 3 days," she said. "The forge was cold. The Red Hoods passed twice, asking after you." He blinked. "Aye." But she was already walking away, eyes down, as if speaking too long was dangerous. Back in the forge, the routine took over. His hands remembered what he did not. They guided the hammer and tong as if they'd done it for years. He crafted knives with balance, swords with bite, horseshoes with grace. Customers came and went, none suspecting that the man before them was not who he seemed. And all the while, Kalen's mind burned with questions. Why was he here? Why this man, this city? And why did the red-robed monks stare at him with such silence? He found the answers not in books, for there were none, but from the oldest customer who visited his forge. A man called Erwin hunched and hunched again, with hands like twisted roots and eyes the color of rusted coins. "You don't remember me today," Erwin said one morning, squinting at Kalen. "That's fine. Happens when you get too close." "Too close to what?" Kalen asked, wiping his brow. Erwin lowered his voice. "The vein of dreams." The old man looked around before leaning closer. "You're not from here, are you?" Kalen froze. Erwin smiled faintly. "Didn't think so." Rin was quiet, but never forgetful. "You're wearing him like a cloak." That night, Kalen dreamt again, but this time not of Emberlight. He dreamt of his real home, of Elbert, the cottage, his quills, his hands soft again, ink-stained. A deer passing his window, wind chimes made of bone. But even in the dream, something was wrong. The moon was too large. His books were blank. And standing in the doorway was one of the red-hooded monks. Watching, waiting. He jolted awake in the forge, the hearth dim, the tools still warm. But outside it was no longer day. And Emberlight after sunset was another world entirely. Where once there had been quiet, there was now silence. The braziers outside no longer floated but hovered motionless, their light frozen like gold locked in amber. The streets were empty, doors barred, curtains drawn. Kalen stepped outside, drawn by a whisper he could not name. The city was beautiful and terrible in the dark. Statues moved when not watched. Windows reflected things not inside them. And from the alleys, soft chants rose like steam, old languages, older than kingdoms, older than memory. And always the monks. They glided through the streets without footsteps, always alone, always silent. One stopped at the mouth of the alley where Kalen stood. Its head turned slowly toward him. He stepped back. It raised one pale hand and placed a single coin on the ground. Then it vanished. The next day, Kalen returned to Erwin. "The monks," he said. "What are they?" Erwin looked troubled. "They were once men. Historians, they say. Keepers of truth. Now, they are bound to the city. Bound to the dream vein." Kalen pressed him. "What is that?" Owen's voice dropped to a whisper. "Long ago, beneath this city, something was buried. A scar left in the flesh of the world when a god dreamed too deeply. That scar seeps into the stone, into the minds of men. It gives visions, and sometimes it takes lives in return." Kalen felt a chill run through him. "You're saying the city knows I'm not from here?" "It doesn't just know," Erwin said. "It wants you here. For something." So Kalen lived. By day, he forged iron and steel, blending into the skin of a man named Rin. By night, he dreamt of his old life, a life that now felt faded, distant, as though it belonged to someone else entirely. But something was wrong. The dreams were changing. His own memories began to rot. He couldn't recall the name of the steward who paid him. The face of the baker's daughter blurred. His mother's voice, once so clear, grew silent. And in the dream of Eldbrook, the forge began to appear. At first just its sound, then the light, then the scent of smoke. The boundary was thinning. Something was following him back. One morning, as the mists of emberlight still clung to the streets like ghosts, a stranger came to the forge. He was tall, cloaked, his voice soft but sharp. "A blade needs mending," he said, pulling a long cloth bundle from his side. Kalen nodded, wiping his hands. "What's the damage?" The man said nothing. He unwrapped the blade slowly, the steel dark as night, rimmed in symbols Kalen didn't recognize. But it was the inscription at the hilt that stopped his breath. It was his name, not Rin, not a smith's mark. Kalen, written in the old script, the one he used in Eldbrook, the exact curl of his signature. His heart pounded. "This must be a mistake," he whispered, but the man only tilted his head. "That name has weight here, more than you know." Kalen looked up. "Where did you get this?" The man turned, already leaving. "Ask the monks," he said. "They've been waiting for you longer than you've been dreaming." Kalen stood in the doorway of the forge, the sword in his hands, trembling. It was a simple thing. Steel, leather grip, balanced. A blade made not by accident, but by design. His design? But perhaps another version of him? A version that had been here before? He stared at his name, etched as if with fire. And in the far distance, atop the city's tallest spire, a single red-hooded figure turned and stared directly at him. There are weapons made for battle. There are weapons made for show. And then there are weapons that should never have been made at all. Kalen stood alone in the forge, dawn creeping like blood through the cracks of the basalt walls. Before him, resting on the work table wrapped in thick black cloth, lay the sword, the one bearing his name. His real name, not the name of the blacksmith he had become. Not Rin, but Kalen, etched into the hilt in the looping script he used only in his private notes back home. In the old world, the real one, the sword felt heavy even without being lifted, as if it remembered something he didn't, as if it had weight beyond metal, the weight of memory, of fate. He reached for it, and the moment his fingers grazed the hilt, the forge fell away. He was standing in a field of fire. The sky above him was torn, not cloudy, but ripped like parchment. From the seams fell ash, feathers, and faint glimmers of light. Beneath his feet, the grass burned blue. He held the sword in both hands, the same sword, blood-stained and cracked. Before him, two armies clashed, not with the chaos of battle, but with the rhythm of something ancient, rehearsed, and ritualistic. Their armor shimmered with symbols he didn't understand, and their faces were hidden behind masks of bone and bronze. A name echoed across the battlefield. Not Kalen, but Valor. He turned to find the source, and saw himself, or someone who wore his face. This version of him stood on a ridge, clad in black robes, a crown of blades around his brow, arms outstretched. He watched the battle with cold, unreadable eyes. Then, suddenly, the sword in Kalen's hand screamed, not with sound, but with heat and vision. He saw temples burning, scrolls turning to ash, a man begging for mercy as molten iron was poured over his chest. And above it all, a voice, his voice, whispering a curse that split the sky. And then silence. He collapsed. He woke in the forge gasping, smoke clinging to his lungs. The sword sat calmly before him. But something had changed. The air smelled faintly of incense and lightning. The hearth, which had burned low, now blazed with unnatural flame, white, steady, unblinking. And then the bell rang. A figure entered. A woman in a traveler's cloak, dust clinging to her boots and a scar running like a crack across one cheek. She spoke without greeting. "The blade you hold was never meant to see the light again." Kalen's voice was hoarse. "You know this sword?" "I know where it was found," she said. "Buried beneath a monastery. The old one, at Vale Orwyn." His breath caught. That name, Vale Orwyn. He hadn't heard it in years. Not since childhood dreams, fevered, recurring ones, of a monastery wrapped in snow, its bells tolling at dusk though no one was there to ring them. That place is sealed, she continued. 300 years. No doors. No roof. Only a circle of carved stone and a silence that drives men mad. Then how? I didn't find it, she said. It found me. In dreams. It called. When I arrived, I found a tunnel beneath the altar. The sword was waiting, humming like a trapped breath. And your name was already there. Kaylin's mouth was dry. You brought it to me? She shook her head. I left it where it lay. A man in red robes followed me for days. I only know it has now returned, and you must take it back. Return it to the stone circle before Emberlight forgets how to sleep. Her gaze turned sharp. You've already noticed the signs, haven't you? He hesitated. He had. The dreams were worsening. The line between day and night was thinning. The monks stared longer. The city breathed louder. Something was awakening. I don't even know who I am anymore, he whispered. She stepped forward and placed a hand over the sword. You are Kaylin, but you were once more. You were Valor, the man who split the vein of dreams. The sword remembers. And now, so does the city. That night, the stars refused to shine. Kaylin lay awake, the sword resting against the wall. It hummed faintly now, a low, pulsing thrum that vibrated through the stone and into his bones. He tried not to look at it, tried to think of Eldbrook, of ink, of peace. But the fire in the hearth flickered strangely, casting shadows that danced with too many arms. The windows showed not the street but a spiral staircase descending endlessly into dark. He covered the sword with cloth and turned away. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it brought no rest. He stood again at Vale Orwyn. The monastery was not in ruins this time. It was whole, towering, holy, alive with chanting. He walked its halls, recognizing places he had never seen. The library where scrolls whispered. The garden where the statues wept. The altar where dreams were once offered to the god beneath the stone. And then he reached the sanctum. The blade lay on a pedestal, glowing. Waiting. He reached for it. And as his fingers closed around the hilt, it turned of its own will and pointed at his heart. The reflection in its polished steel spoke. You broke the world. He awoke with a cry. And silence. The fire was out. The forge cold. The sword was gone from the wall. He looked around, panic rising, when he saw it. It stood upright in the center of the room, buried in the stone floor, though no force on earth should have driven it into solid rock. Its edge shimmered, and then it moved. By itself. It turned toward him, and from the empty air, from the steel's very core, a voice rose. His voice, but older, darker, etched with a sorrow that sounded like thunder in a tomb. Kaylin, it said, and then one word more. Return. There were rules in Emberlight, though few knew who had written them, and none dared to test their bounds. Rule 1. After sunset, no doors are to be opened. Rule 2. If the monks in red pass your threshold, you do not speak to them unless spoken to first. And Rule 3. Always whispered, never written. The forge is not to burn on the 7th night of any cycle. For that is when the city listens. Kaylin had broken all 3. And now they had come for him. They arrived without a sound, just before dawn, when even the sky seemed to hold its breath. Kaylin had not slept. He sat beside the sword still lodged in stone, its blade faintly pulsing like a heartbeat beneath steel. He'd locked the doors, shuttered the windows. But in Emberlight, locks meant nothing to those who walked without weight. The forge went still. The coals died without ember or smoke. The hammer, left hanging on its hook, began to sway. And then he heard them. Footsteps that did not echo. Robes that did not rustle. A silence so thick it bled into the marrow. When he opened the door, they were already inside. 3 of them, hooded, dressed in red so deep it seemed to drink the morning. Their faces were hidden. No features, no flesh, only shadow beneath the folds. One stepped forward. The air chilled with its movement. You have held what was never meant to be lifted, it said. Its voice was neither male nor female. but carved like granite and wind. Kalen swallowed. It came to me. I didn't seek it. The second monk raised a finger. And yet you touched it. And so the thread frays. Kalen's hands trembled. What is it? The sword, the dreams, this place. Why me? The third monk moved. Not walked, moved. Like mist bending around corners. Its hand reached toward the sword, but did not touch. The blade bears the mark of Valor. That is a name drowned in blood and fire. I don't know who that is, Kalen said, stepping back. You wore his face once, the first monk replied. You wear another's now. I'm just, Kalen began, but the second monk interrupted. You are not just anything. You are one who crossed the dream vein without permission. And now you pull others behind you. Kalen stared at them. What is the dream vein? The monks looked to each other. Then the first one spoke, slowly, as if choosing words was dangerous. When the gods warred, their dreams spilled into the earth. Not their blood. Dreams. One dream fell here, too deep, too vast, too hungry. It cracked the spine of time and made this city sleep forever in its shadow. Emberlight. Kalen whispered. Built to hold the wound closed, the monk said. But dreamers are drawn to wounds. And sometimes one slips through. The second monk stepped forward again. You are not the first, but you are the worst. You brought a blade meant to stay buried. You stirred memories meant to sleep. Now the vein stirs. Kalen's heart pounded. What does that mean? The third monk finally spoke. Its voice like water under ice. If you do not return the sword, we will cut the thread between sleep and flesh. You will be lost, not to dream, not to death, but to the place between, and you will never be found again. Kalen looked at the sword. It still shimmered faintly, pulsing, humming. It knew he was listening. He turned back to the monks. And if I do return it? They answered as one, then you may wake, or you may not. That is for the dream to decide. Kalen stepped forward. Where do I take it? The monks grew still. You know. And he did. Vale Orwyn. The monastery. The place he had dreamed of since childhood, long before Emberlight, long before the forge, long before any of this. He nodded slowly. I'll take it there. The monks did not speak. They simply turned and vanished, like mist into morning. He packed before sunrise. The sword, still reluctant to be touched, now slid free of the stone as if it had been waiting. He wrapped it in cloth, bound it with leather, and fastened it tight. He said nothing to his neighbors, though they surely watched through shuttered windows, whispering his name as if it were a curse. He walked through the streets with purpose. No one stopped him. Not the butchers, not the scribes, not the guards who watched from rooftops with their gleaming halberds. Only one soul dared approach, a child, barefoot, holding a flower. You smell like fire, the child said. Kalen didn't respond. The child smiled anyway. Don't let the trees talk you into staying. Kalen froze. What trees? But the child was already gone. He reached the outer gate by noon. The high black arch of stone marked the end of Emberlight's heart, the place where paved roads gave way to the old trade path, long disused and half swallowed by grass. But something was wrong. There were no roads, no fields, no path, only forest, thick, ancient, silent, and it hadn't been there yesterday. Trees loomed high as towers, their bark black-veined, their leaves silver-green. Mist hung low, curling like fingers. The sun did not reach here. Even birds dared not sing. Kalen stepped back. He looked up at the guards on the wall, but they were gone. No torches, no figures, no city sounds, only trees. He turned behind him, but Emberlight was gone too. In its place, forest, endless, unmoving, and in the distance, a single toll of a bell. Hollow, distant, familiar. Vale Orwyn. He held the sword tighter. It thrummed in response, as if the forest had always been here, as if the city had never existed. And in the stillness, just beneath the whisper of leaves, he heard the monk's warning again. Return it or be unmade. But it was too late to turn back, because there was no back anymore. Only forward, only the forest. and the path that remembered dreams. At first, Kalen thought the forest was silent, but it wasn't. It was listening. That was worse. It stretched out before him, tall, endless trees with trunks so wide it would take 6 men to circle them. Their bark was ash-gray, but not like wood. More like old bone, ridged and grooved as if something had tried to carve its way out from the inside. The leaves shimmered silver-green, and yet no wind moved them. And though the world around him breathed like a forest should, it watched like no forest ever had. Kalen stepped forward. The moment his foot touched the soft moss, the gate behind him was gone. No wall, no guards, no city, just trees, and the sword on his back, pulsing with a heartbeat that wasn't his. Time moved differently here. Not slower, not faster, just strong. The light never shifted, never changed. The sky above was a misty gray dome, heavy and thick. No sun broke through. No birds sang. Yet Kalen could feel the passing of moments, long, dragging stretches where minutes felt like hours, and then whole hours slipped away in the blink of an eye. He wandered for what he thought was a day. Maybe more. There were no paths, no sounds but his own breathing. And then came the whispers. At first, he thought them tricks of the wind, but there was no wind. Then he realized they weren't just sounds. They were names, whispered between branches. So, careful. Names he didn't recognize. And then names he did. Kalen, Valor, Valor, the fire hand, Kalen of Eldbrook, Valor, the betrayer, each one spoken by a different voice. Some with sorrow, some with rage, some with fear. He spun, trying to catch who spoke, but there was never anyone there. Only the trees, and his own face in the reflections between them. He called out, for the cloaked woman, for the monks, for anyone. No answer came, but the forest began to shift. The trees leaned when he wasn't looking. Paths he had already walked led to places he'd never seen. His own footprints vanished behind him. And always, always, the sword pulsed louder the deeper he went. Then he saw the shrine. It stood alone in a glade. Not built, but grown, roots twisted into pillars, vines into rafters. The roof was shattered, open to the unmoving sky. At the center stood a circle of stones, worn smooth by years that didn't exist. On every stone, the sword. Dozens of them, each one identical. Same blade, same hilt, same inscription. His name. Kalen stared. He walked a full circle. North, south, west, east. Each time, the sword appeared again. There were no mirrors, no illusions. Everywhere he turned, his sword waited. He stepped toward one of them and reached out. But just before his fingers touched the blade, he heard it. A voice behind him. But unmistakably his own. Valor, it said. You return at last. Kalen turned. A man stood beneath the trees, clad in black robes, crowned with thin blades of gold and rust, eyes dark as storm clouds, and a face. His face, but older, colder, empty. Kalen stumbled back. Who are you? He asked. The figure stepped forward. Shadows curled behind him like mist. His bare feet left no mark. I am who you once were. I am what you buried. The dream that broke the world. No, Kalen whispered. That's not me. It is, the figure said. You wear borrowed lives like skins. You drift from dream to dream, trying to forget what you did. But the forest remembers. The sword remembers. And now, so do you. Kalen shook his head. I don't understand. Not yet, but you will. The figure raised his hand. All the swords in the shrine lifted with him, floating like leaves on water. And from every blade, the same voice rang out. His voice, overlapping, endless, echoing. Valor the betrayer. Valor who stole the fire. Valor who split the dream vein. You cannot run from yourself. Kalen dropped to his knees, hands over his ears, but the sound pierced through skin, through thought, through memory. The shrine spun. The trees blurred. The ground cracked beneath him. And then silence. When he opened his eyes, he was lying alone in the center of the shrine. Only one sword remained. The others were gone. The figure was gone. But carved into the stone now, at his feet, were 4 words. Take the path backward. He looked up. The forest hadn't moved. But he had changed. The whispers no longer followed him. The trees no longer leaned. And far ahead, just at the edge of sight, a road waited. Not one he recognized, but one that called to something deeper than memory. He stood, lifted the sword, and stepped toward the path that should not exist, yet always had. Kalen stood alone beneath the bone-white trees, the windless forest still wrapped around him like a held breath. The shrine was behind him, half crumbled now, though he hadn't seen it fall. The circle of stones that once held dozens of blades now held only one. The sword strapped to his back felt heavier than ever, as though it remembered truths his mind still refused to carry. And then the voice came again. You've worn many names. Kalen turned, expecting the robed figure from before. But it wasn't him. This man was translucent, more light than flesh, a shimmer of color against the dim woods, no more solid than memory. He stepped from the shrine's broken archway, feet hovering inches above the ground, eyes glowing faintly like dying embers. Yet Kalen knew him at once. He was himself. Same face, same eyes, same line across the brow, earned from a fall as a boy in Eldbrook. But older, tired, shadowed by something deeper than age. What are you? Kalen asked. The spirit's voice was soft but sure. I am what remains. Kalen stepped back, hand instinctively on the sword. The spirit didn't move. You dream, it said, and you call those dreams strange. But this place, all of it, was once yours. That's impossible, Kalen said. I'm a scribe. From Eldbrook. I've never seen these woods. I never came near this cursed place until the dreams dragged me here. The spirit tilted its head. No, you were a warlord. A king of no country. You led men into fire. You took cities that never appeared on maps. You stole what the gods swore never to name aloud. I don't believe you. The ghost stepped closer. Its form flickered slightly, like a reflection on water. You stole a relic from the god of dreams, a fragment of their power. You used it to rewrite your fate. I don't want power, Kalen shouted. I wanted a quiet life. I had one. The spirit's voice darkened. Because you stole that life. You've been stealing lives ever since. The relic cursed you. To wander across time. To wake inside other fates. To carry the weight of dreams you never earned and memories that were never yours. Kalen trembled. You're lying. The spirit raised its hand. You once burned the city of Sularin from the inside out, leaving only the towers standing. I've never heard of it. You sealed the gates of the Red Abbey with blood. You drank from the bowl of echoes. You stood beneath the shattered moon of Kyre. Those are stories. They're your stories. Kalen shook his head. No one remembers any of that. Because the world has forgotten you. That is part of the curse. The spirit turned away then, gazing at the trees as though they held all the answers that Kalen had spent his life avoiding. You've died 1,000 times, it murmured. You've lived as a scholar, a soldier, a shepherd, a boy who drowned in a sacred well, a woman who vanished into a storm of glass, and now as a blacksmith whose body is not yours. Kalen felt sick. The forest tilted. How do I know this isn't another dream? He asked. The spirit looked back, and this time its eyes were hard, because no dream dares wound like truth does. The forest grew darker. Not with night, but with pressure. The air thickened. The trees groaned, softly at first, then louder. Branches twisted, not with wind, but as if something beneath the roots was waking. You remember more than you admit, the spirit whispered. Kalen backed away. I remember my mother's lullaby. The spirit smiled. That's not hers. That's the dream god's hymn, sung only once, on the night you broke the vein. I remember my cottage, my village, places built for you, not by you, set pieces to trap your mind in peace. I remember the sound of my own name. Which name? The spirit asked. The earth cracked. A line opened beneath the shrine, black and endless. No light came from it, only cold. The sound, not a roar, not a scream, but the inhaling of something vast. The spirit looked toward it, and for the first time, Kaelin saw fear in its eyes. It's begun, it whispered. What is that? The space between, the spirit said, where forgotten dreams sleep and broken souls go to remember. Kaelin felt the ground shift again. It's pulling me, because the relic calls to itself, the spirit said, and the sword holds its last fragment. Kaelin drew the blade. It hummed violently, glowing faintly from its runes. I don't want this, he shouted. I never asked for this. You did, said the spirit. Long ago, when you stood before the altar and wished to never die again. The fissure widened. The spirit reached out, not to stop him, but to steady him. You must go, not because it is your fate, but because it is your fault. What will I find there? The spirit faded. Yourself. And then the ground gave way. Kaelin fell. Fell not through stone or soil, but through memory. Images blurred past him, cities that never were, faces he'd never met, voices that called him brother, father, monster, God. He fell past all of them, and into the space between waking and dream, where the world waited, where time forgot him, where the true price of what he stole still waited to be paid. Kaelin had no sense of falling, no air brushing past his skin, no pull in his chest, only the sensation of being unmade, like threads unwoven from the cloth of the world. And then suddenly he was again. He opened his eyes to a sky of shattered glass, 1,000 jagged sheets, floating like ice on invisible seas, each pane reflecting a different sun, a different moon, a different version of a world he couldn't name. The ground beneath him was cold and smooth, like stone polished by centuries of silence. But it was not stone. It was bone. Not white, but ambered and dark, fossilized by time. The ribs of something ancient rose around him like the arches of a cathedral, bones the size of towers, curled and cracked. In the distance, across a plain of silver ash, stood statues, tall and slender, cloaked in lichen and dust. Each one had no face, but all of them wept. Their tears, thick and glowing, dripped molten gold down their frozen cheeks and into bowls carved at their feet. Kaelin moved toward one, unable to stop himself, and peered into the golden basin. The surface rippled and showed a memory. A forge, smoke curling, and a man, not Kaelin, shaping a blade. Rin, the real blacksmith, alive. Behind him, a voice broke the silence. You shouldn't be here as you are. Kaelin turned. A figure approached, barefoot on bone, wrapped in robes of lightless blue, the fabric stitched from smoke. Its face flickered like candlelight. No features, just the impression of what a face might be, fluid, uncertain, soft as breath. You crossed improperly, it said. Torn, not guided. A violation. Kaelin reached for his sword, but it was gone. I fell, he said. The earth opened. A spirit. The figure raised a hand. I know. It walked slowly around him, and the space seemed to bend with each step. You carry too many lives in one vessel. The threads frayed. You shouldn't still exist. Where am I? Kaelin asked. The figure paused. This is the threshold of the reclaimed, it said, where souls come to wear their regrets once more, before they're allowed to move on. To where? The flickering head tilted. Forward, backward, or into the quiet. Kaelin swallowed. So I'm dead? No, not fully, but you are remembered by the dead. That's almost the same. As the figure gestured, the landscape changed. Not shifted, peeled. Like a page turned mid-story. The skies burned with orange flame. The bones beneath turned to black marble. And around him, instead of statues, he saw moments. Moments like bubbles, floating in the air, gently circling him. He reached toward one. It popped at his touch. And then he saw it. A child running from a burning chapel, clutching a sword too large for him, screaming a name Kalen didn't know, yet his chest ached with the sound. Another bubble, a man kneeling in blood, his own voice whispering, "Forgive me, I thought it would save us." Another, the blacksmith, Rin, beaten, dragged through snow, shackled, eyes defiant, "This isn't my blade. I don't know where it came from." And then, silence. The moments faded. Kalen staggered. "They're not all mine," he said. "No," the spirit replied, "but you borrowed all of them." Time passed, though it no longer behaved as it should. Sometimes Kalen moved and saw days melt by with each step. Other times he stood still, and years passed beneath his feet like drifting mist. He watched lives unfold around him. A warrior throwing down his sword, a monk walking into the sea, a queen writing a name she had forgotten how to pronounce. Each of them glimpsed him just briefly and whispered, "Valor." He heard the name so often he stopped flinching. But one thing lingered, louder than the others. The blacksmith's voice. Always that voice. "I don't know where it came from." And Kalen realized he had taken the blacksmith's fate, too. Whatever curse bound him, whatever he had done with the dream god's relic, it didn't just trap him in dreams. It let him steal them. He returned to the statues. They wept still, but now they hummed, but steady. He reached one again, peering into the bowl of gold. This time, it showed himself. Not Kalen, not Rin, not Valor, but something in between. A man wrapped in a dozen faces, each flickering like candlelight. The statue turned to look at him. "You are not the first thief," it whispered, "but you may be the last." Kalen stepped back. Then the voice behind him spoke again. "You want to leave?" Turned. A different ghost now. Smaller, thinner, wearing a face half-formed, the eyes sunken, the skin pale and waxy. A child, or perhaps a shadow of one. "I know the way," the ghost said. "I want to return," Kalen whispered. "To Emberlight. To finish this. To return the sword." The ghost nodded. "I can take you, but nothing leaves without a cost." Kalen narrowed his eyes. "What cost?" The ghost smiled. It was not a child's smile. It was the smile of something older than memory. "Your face," it said. Kalen froze. "What?" "Your name, your shape, your story. You must leave them here. You may return to the world, but you will not return as yourself." "And if I refuse?" The ghost looked up. All around them, the bubbles of memory froze, shattered, and behind them, the sky of glass began to fall, slowly, silently, splinters of other realities raining down like frost. "Then you stay," the ghost said, "and dream forever." Kalen looked to the sword in his hands, or where it should have been. He closed his eyes. He thought of the boy in the forge, the monks, the cursed blade, the shrine, the voice that wore his voice. And he asked himself one question. What was a face in a world made of masks? He opened his eyes. "I'll pay," he said, and the ghost reached out. Its fingers touched his brow, and everything unraveled. Kalen stepped through the veil, and the world did not welcome him back. It was Emberlight, or it had been, but not as he remembered it. The sky above was the color of bruised smoke, thick with ash that drifted like snow through the crooked spires and shattered arches of the city. Streets once paved with molten glass tiles were now cracked and dark, veined with soot. The floating braziers that had once lit the city with golden fire hung lifeless, their chains rusted, their flames long since extinguished. He stood at the edge of what was once the forge district, but the forge itself, Rin's forge, was a ruin. Its walls crumbled, its anvil blackened and split in two like a broken tooth. There were no voices, no merchants shouting, no steel clanging, only wind, and the soft, sick sound of things shifting beneath the ash. Kalen looked down at his hands. They were not his. They were hands, yes, but they bore no scars, no marks, no memory. Just skin. Smooth. He touched his face. It felt hollow, like a mask stretched thin over something that had forgotten what it used to be. He tried to speak his name, but it caught in his throat. He had no name anymore. and no one to speak it. He wandered through silent alleys and abandoned gardens, across bridges that now led only to mist. The city had become a shell of itself, as though all the people had vanished in a breath, leaving only dust and the shape of what had been. Now and then he glimpsed shadows, not people but memories, flickering behind doorways and through broken windows. A woman carrying water, a boy chasing a hoop, a man holding his head in his hands. But they vanished the moment he looked directly at them. Even the monks in red were gone. Only their hoods remained, empty, hanging from the archways like dried skins. And then, on the third day, or perhaps it was the third hour, for time no longer kept order, he saw the child. A small girl, barefoot, with a crown of twigs and frost in her hair. She stood in the center of a dry fountain, the statue behind her melted by heat that no longer burned. She held a bundle wrapped in old cloth, dirt-stained and tied with twine. As Kaelin approached, she did not flinch. Instead, she said very softly, "You dropped this." He blinked. You don't remember." Her eyes were too old for her face. "You wouldn't." She handed it to him and stepped back. When he looked down, the bundle was already unwrapped. A mirror, oval, framed in iron twisted like vines, edges worn smooth by centuries of use. But the glass was not glass. It was dark, too dark, and when he lifted it to his face, there was no reflection. No eyes staring back. No skin. No shape. Only a field, endless and gray, blanketed in fog and ash. And at its farthest edge, two armies, both perfectly still, rows upon rows of soldiers locked in silence, like statues waiting to breathe. Banners flapped with no wind. Horses stamped on soil that gave no sound. And at the front of each army stood a figure. Kaelin, twice. On one side, he wore black armor lined in gold, his eyes cold, his hands soaked in old blood. On the other, he wore robes of white ash, a sword at his side and a torch in his left hand. Both versions stared at one another. And then, as Kaelin watched, they turned to him. The mirror shuddered, and both spoke in the same voice. His voice. "Choose." He dropped the mirror. It didn't break, only sank slowly into the stone floor, like water swallowing a stone. The air shifted, and the sword returned. Not in his hands, not in its sheath, but beside him, standing upright, balanced impossibly on its point, as if the stone itself had grown soft for its weight. It pulsed once, then again, then spoke, not aloud, but into the space behind his eyes, into the marrow of his bones. "You've borrowed many faces." Kaelin did not speak. "You remember none of them, but they all remember you." He stepped back, but the sword followed. Not moving, Bing. You cannot leave the war undone. You cannot leave the world unchosen. "What war?" Kaelin whispered. The sword hummed. "The war of the self." In the distance, the sky trembled. The ground cracked faintly beneath his feet. The sword tilted, just slightly, as if bowing toward him. "Choose which side of yourself you will save." Kaelin stood there a long time. Long enough for the ash to gather on his shoulders. Long enough for the wind to begin carrying voices again, not of others, but of himself, echoing across time. Words he had spoken in other lives. Promises broken. Warnings ignored. Odes whispered to empty gods. And beneath it all, silence. The kind of silence that came before the scream. He bent. He reached for the sword. And just before his fingers closed around it, he heard footsteps behind him. And a whisper. "Whichever you choose, you won't leave unchanged." The world fell away in silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence before a great storm. The kind of silence that presses into your ears, into your chest, as though the very sky is holding its breath. Kaelin stood motionless, his fingers hovering over the sword that had haunted a dozen lifetimes. His name, or what had once been his name, had been taken by ash and time. His face forgotten, his voice lost. And now the world, or whatever remained of it, had begun to pull him elsewhere. The earth beneath him cracked open with light, not flame, not heat, but dream light, shifting, endless, and without color. It swallowed him, gently and without question. And then he was not. He awoke, if one could call it that, standing inside a chamber that had no walls, no ceiling, and yet felt heavier than stone. The stars here had no names. The air did not breathe, and at the center of it all, seated on a throne of unspoiled time, was the god. Not a statue, not a vision, not a whisper, but the thing behind all whispers, the dream god. Its body was formed of 1,000 faces, none of them fixed, all of them shifting. A child's smile becoming a mourner's grimace, a king's sneer melting into a soldier's scream. They moved like reflections in water that never stilled, each face glimpsed only for a moment before another slid into its place. Its voice came not from a mouth but from everywhere. A storm trapped in a bottle, a whisper beneath thunder. "You've returned, Valor." Kalen's knees buckled at the sound, but he stayed upright. He didn't answer. The god spoke again. "You've walked many names, worn skin like clothing, loved and betrayed and died in places never written on maps. Do you know why?" Kalen's voice came out rough, uncertain. "Because I stole something from you." The god's many eyes, thousands, blinked in unison. "Not from me. Of me." Kalen took a breath. "The blade." The god nodded, or perhaps shifted in a way that felt like nodding. "You did not take it to rule. You took it to escape, to break the order, to unshackle yourself from death. And I was cursed for it." "No," the god replied. "You were split." The chamber trembled. The stars above flickered. "You fractured your soul across the fabric of time, across memory, dream, and breath. And in doing so, you tore a hole through which others fell. You have not only stolen lives, you've broken them. The blacksmith, the woman in the salt city, the boy who dreamed of wings. They were never yours, but you woke in them all the same." Kalen lowered his eyes. "Then let me put it right." The dream god stirred. "Many have asked to undo their sins. Most beg to forget. Some choose to sleep forever. You've come further than most. I want to finish what I started. You must Valor, but not as a thief." The god raised a hand, and behind it, the void peeled open, revealing 2 paths. One led back to Eldbrook, to ink, parchment, cold mornings, and quiet deaths. The other led back to Emberlight, but not the Emberlight he had left. The true one, before it burned, before he had stolen the blade. 2 choices, the god said. Return and forget. Sleep in peace. The life you knew will be restored, as Kalen the scribe, no more, no less. The blacksmith will never know you. The blade will vanish. The dreams will end. Kalen looked to the other path. And the other? Finish Rin's life. Take his path. Face the war you began, not with a sword, but with the weight of your memory. Relive the betrayal. Carry it, burn in it, and restore the thread you severed. Kalen stepped forward. The scribe died the moment I stole the dream. I'll finish the blacksmith's life. The dream god's faces flickered, too fast to follow. Then understand this. Once you choose, you may not wake again. Not in your world. Not in any. I understand. And one more truth, the god whispered. He no longer wishes to return what you've stolen. Kalen's heart stilled. Who? Rin. The real blacksmith. The man whose body he had lived inside. The man whose dreams had been devoured. The gods' voices layered over one another, a tide of thunder and wind. He remembers. He waits. And he hates you. The paths shimmered once more. And Kalen stepped toward the flame. Toward Emberlight. Toward the life he never earned, but now owed. When Kalen opened his eyes, the world tasted of iron. He was lying on the floor of the forge, no longer shattered, no longer in ruin. The walls stood again, rebuilt not by brick and mortar, but by the will of the dream god. Everything was where it had once been. The anvil, the bellows, the hammers laid out in their proper rows. Smoke danced from the hearth. Sparks crackled, leaping up like spirits freed from chains. The world had remembered itself. But something had changed. His hands, they moved before thought. They gripped tools, adjusted fire, pressed metal with the kind of rhythm earned by muscle and memory. Yet these were not his memories. He knew the motion, not the meaning. He crafted blades with skill, but not with understanding. He could shape iron now, but he could no longer shape words. The scribe was fading, and the blacksmith was growing stronger in his place. He worked in silence that day, not by choice, but because no one came. The village was still there, the streets, the houses, but the people, they passed him like smoke. They met his eyes and turned away. Some whispered, some crossed themselves, some watched from windows without blinking, and in their gazes, Kalen saw something terrifying. Recognition, not of who he was, but of what he was not. That night, he stared into the forge fire long after it should have died, and heard a name, not whispered, not spoken, carved into the heat itself. Valor. The next morning, the door creaked open before he touched it. She stood there, the cloaked woman, but she was no longer cloaked in rags and travel dust. Her robes shimmered like water under moonlight. Her face was pale, ageless, and entirely still, too still for anything mortal. Around her neck hung a necklace of keys, each one a different shape, forged from bone, iron, glass, and ash. He stepped back. "You've come back," he said. Her eyes didn't blink. "You never left." Kalen swallowed. "What are you?" She stepped into the forge. Her feet made no sound on the stone. "I am what waits at the edges of self. I keep the gates between memory and forgetting, between the name you carry and the ones you've buried. You're not human." "No," she said, "but I was." Her fingers brushed the anvil. It sang under her touch. "I was the first soul to be forgotten by the dream god, the first who woke in another's life and never found the way back. I stayed too long, and now I tend to those who follow." "Follow," she said. She looked at his hands. "They obey, but they do not belong to you." He nodded slowly. "I feel him, the real blacksmith. He's still here. He is always here. I thought I was him. You were, and you weren't." Kalen gritted his teeth. "So what am I now?" The woman turned. "You are a man made of others, a vessel patched together by sorrow, fire, and theft. But the seams are breaking." He looked down at his reflection in a basin of water. It shifted. One moment it was his, Kalen, the scribe, then Rin, the blacksmith. Then neither. Just a blur of faces overlapping, folding into one another like waves over sand. "I want to finish this," he said. "Return what I took. End the dreaming." She stepped close. Then listened carefully. The forge grew cold. The fire dimmed. Outside, the wind rose, whispering things no wind should know. "The man whose life you stole," she said, "is coming back for it." Kalen's blood froze. Tonight. The anvil cracked. The sword, the blade that bore no allegiance, only memory, trembled in its place. And in the silence, the world seemed to lean in, as if it too was waiting to see which of them would still be standing by dawn. Night came too fast. The sun slipped behind the edge of emberlight as though it had been pulled, not by the weight of time, but by something hungrier. A force that did not rise or fall, but waited, quiet and still, until its name was spoken. Kalen did not light the forge fire that evening. He stood alone in the center of the workshop, bare walls around him, his tools laid out not for use, but for reckoning. His hands no longer trembled. They were not his and never had been, but they moved as though they remembered what this night meant. Outside, the wind stopped. Even the trees, long ago twisted by dream and memory, stood still. And inside the forge, the air thickened. It began slowly, the cracking of stone underfoot, the flickering of candles that had not been lit. His reflection in the forge's iron door rippled, then split. He saw himself, and then he saw the other. Not the dream god, not Valor, but Rin, the blacksmith, the true owner of the body he had worn like a borrowed coat. He had returned, and he was furious. Kalen stumbled back as the forge twisted. One breath, and the world turned inside out. Stone became sky. Flame became fog. and when he opened his eyes again, he stood in the dream realm. But it was no longer empty. He stood at the center of a great hall, ancient and broken, its ceiling torn open to a sky that bled memory like rain. Each drop landed as a moment, flickers of time, lives he had lived. A knight dying in a flooded keep. A woman writing letters to children she never bore. A thief running from a cathedral set ablaze. A beggar whispering a prophecy to a king who would forget his name. Each life circled him. Each version was him. And none of them knew who the others were. Across the hall, Rin stepped forward. He wore Kaelin's face, or what that face had become, but stripped of softness, of thought. His eyes were forged from betrayal. His hands were calloused with rage. "You've worn my name long enough," Rin said. Kaelin tried to speak, to explain, to apologize, to beg. But the dream would not allow it. This was not a place for questions. Only truths. Only judgment. They circled each other across a floor paved in forgotten promises. And around them, the past lives watched in silence. Some reached for Kaelin. Others turned their backs. Some wept. Some smiled. All of them waited. The sword, that cursed blade, born from the dream god's relic, and the theft that shattered time, appeared between them. Not on the ground, but in the air. Suspended. Glowing. Waiting. And then the voice came, not from the sword, not from the sky, but from within. "You may only live one life." Kaelin stepped forward. "I didn't mean to steal his fate." Rin didn't flinch. "You lived it. That was enough. I wanted to fix it." Rin's voice was calm, but every word struck like iron. "You finished my memories. You buried my name. You gave me your sin and called it a story." They both reached for the sword. It burned them equally. The metal hissed against their palms, but they did not let go. Because now, the choice was no longer in the dream god's hands. It was in theirs. And there was only room for one of them in the waking world. The hall darkened. The echoes fell silent. Only the sword remained, and the two men holding it, each bearing 1,000 echoes, each carrying the weight of time broken and souls borrowed. And in that moment, Kaelin saw everything. He saw his first sin, not stealing the blade, but refusing to die. He saw Rin, dreaming of a quiet life in a city that did not love him, never knowing his body would become the battleground for someone else's guilt. He saw the dream god, not as a figure, but as the space between identities, the watcher of all masks, the keeper of all consequences. And he saw the truth. This wasn't a battle for redemption. It was a battle for return. They raised the sword together. One grip, one strike, and in a flash of golden ash, time unraveled one last time. The light blazed. The chamber split. And when the silence returned, only one shadow remained. But whose? The first thing he felt was the warmth of the forge. Not the heat of fire, but the warmth of stone that had known flame, the kind that holds it like an old secret. A quiet comfort, a returning. He opened his eyes to find himself lying on the floor, face turned toward the hearth. It was not lit, no smoke, no sound, yet the scent of iron lingered in the air, as if something had only just been forged and then forgotten. The man sat up slowly. His body was whole, his breath steady, but his mind was a hall of echoes. He remembered 100 lives, or dreams of lives. A scribe hunched over ink-stained parchment, whose handwriting could mimic the past. A child who stood before a mirror and saw the future writ on his skin. A woman with white hair walking into a storm that never stopped. A warlord with no home. A thief who loved a city that cursed his name. A ghost bound to a sword. A forest that whispered. And one name whispered again and again, but never the same way twice. Kaelin. Valor. Rin. He rose to his feet. The forge was tidy. The tools in place. The windows clean. The anvil scarred from years of use, but not broken. He looked down at his hands. They were strong, but familiar, yet not entirely his. He walked outside. The town was quiet, but not empty. A merchant nodded to him, cheerfully. A girl waved, tossing a roll of cloth across her shoulders. A dog padded up, sniffed his boots, and wagged its tail. No one whispered. No one stared. The world had remembered him, not as a thief or a ghost or a borrowed soul, but simply a man. The blacksmith. That night, an old friend he didn't remember invited him for dinner. They shared bread and spoke of repairs for a wagon axle, of taxes coming due, of the festival next month. He smiled. He nodded. And he listened to their stories. All the while, a quiet voice in the back of his mind whispered, "Is this truly yours?" But the world did not accuse him. The forge called him master. And the sword, the blade that had once sung of blood and betrayal, now lay silent, wrapped in cloth, cold, unmoving. He no longer heard it speak. Weeks passed, and though the dreams grew quieter, they did not stop. Some nights he stood on battlefields that had not yet happened. Others, he walked through monasteries filled with light, or forests that asked him impossible riddles. But he always woke with the sunrise on his face, and the sound of hammers in the morning air. The people called him Rin. He did not correct them. He did not know if they were right. Then, one morning, a letter arrived. No messenger, no seal of office, just a folded piece of parchment resting on the center of his anvil. He hadn't seen anyone come, hadn't heard the door open, but the note was warm, as if someone had just placed it there. He opened it. No signature, no date, only a symbol drawn in black ink, a circle divided by a jagged line, and beneath it 2 words, "You chose." He stared at the message for a long time. What had he chosen? Who had chosen for him? Had he won or surrendered? Had he defeated the real blacksmith? Or had the blacksmith returned and simply forgotten the war? He no longer knew. And maybe that was the point. Maybe choosing to stay meant accepting what the world had rebuilt, whether it had rebuilt him rightly or not. That night, he sat alone in the forge, the fire low, the coals soft and red. He did not work. He only stared into the flame, listening for the sound of memory. None came. But as he closed his eyes, just before sleep took him, he felt it. A breath. Not his. A dream forming, but not his. And in the distance, through the veil of night, through the folds of time and story, he heard a whisper. Not to him, but about him. A child's voice. So curious. Asking someone unseen, "Who is the man I dream of every night?" And then silence. The story doesn't end there. It can't, because the dream never ends. It only changes who it chooses. And somewhere, in some distant village, under a sky that hasn't decided yet if it's real, someone else is dreaming, and the man in the forge is no longer alone. And so, the forge still burns, though the man within it may not remember why. Perhaps he was a blacksmith, perhaps a dreamer, perhaps a thief of time who dared rewrite fate. But the truth? The truth belongs to the fire, to the sword that no longer sings, and to the dream that now dreams him. You've walked through a forgotten city, stood in the echo of gods, crossed forests that never were, and stared into mirrors that don't forgive. But this world, these whispers, they do not end here. They wait, in shadows, in sleep, in the breath between memory and myth. So if your soul stirred, if your pulse quickened when the forest called your name, if you, too, wonder who you were in lives never lived, then stay with us. Like the flame, speak your thoughts in the comments. Share this tale with those who believe in old magic. And if your heart is brave enough, subscribe. For this is only one of many worlds, and the next door opens soon.